In 1946, just months after the end of World War II, the United States Navy launched the largest expedition ever sent to Antarctica. Warships, aircraft, nearly 5,000 men. The mission was supposed to last months, but within weeks, the fleet turned around. And ever since then, people have asked the same question. What happened in Antarctica that forced the most powerful navy in the world to withdraw? The radar operator thinks it's interference. Antarctica already bends signals. Magnetic drift, ionospheric scatter, returns that ghost and vanish without warning. But this one doesn't vanish, it stabilizes. A solid contact, high altitude, no visible propulsion signature. He adjusts the gain, the return sharpens, then splits into three. On the deck, the cold is already violent. Metal contracts with dull, echoing knocks that carry through the hull. Ice presses against steel like slow tectonic movement. Breath freezes in the air before it fully leaves the mouth. The horizon has disappeared. White sky, white sea. No depth, no edge, no reference point. The sky creases. Not a thundercloud, not a storm front. A distortion, like someone has folded the atmosphere and not quite smoothed it out. Shapes descend through that crease, angular, mechanical, hard-edged against the Antarctic ceiling. A Navy pilot banks to intercept. The object mirrors him instantly, too instantly. Compass spins. Artificial horizon jitters. Altitude readings flutter as if the air itself has shifted density.
Control, I have contact, no exhaust, no contrail.
The first white blue discharge strikes the ice. Not the hull, the ice. A straight fracture line whips outwards across the frozen surface, cracking like distant artillery. The vessel shudders, radio chatter overlaps, and one voice cuts clean through the static.
They're hurting us.
Now, that's the claim. That's the extreme version of Operation Highjump, a sky war over Antarctica. Now let's rewind. Operation Highjump was not a rumour, it happened. Launched in August 1946, active into early 1947. Task Force 68, an aircraft carrier, USS Philippine C. Destroyers, submarines, seaplanes, tenders, tankers, support vessels, nearly 5,000 personnel. That number matters. You don't move 5,000 people to the bottom of the planet casually. You move them because someone believes the environment matters strategically. Officially, the mission was straightforward. Train troops in extreme cold, test ships and aircraft in polar conditions, establish research bases, expand US operational capability in remote theatres. The Second World War had ended only a year earlier. The Cold War was beginning to take shape. Military planners were thinking ahead. If future conflict ever reached the Arctic or Antarctic regions, you needed to understand how steel engines and human beings behaved in sub-zero isolation. Antarctica is not just cold, it's mechanically hostile. Steel becomes brittle, hydraulic systems slow, lubricants thicken, fuel gels if not treated properly. Aircraft engines lose efficiency in dense freezing air. Whiteouts erase the horizon entirely. Sky and ground merge into a single sheet of white. Pilots can lose spatial orientation in seconds. Ships grind against pressure ridges of ice that form silently beneath the surface, and navigation near the magnetic poles is already unreliable. Compasses drift unpredictably. Radio signals bounce off the ionosphere. Radar reflections behave strangely against ice fields, and atmospheric density shifts. In other words, you expect anomalies, you expect confusion, you expect equipment to struggle. What you don't expect is a structured response. Here's the detail that makes the story complicated. Highjump entered one of the most technologically destructive regions on Earth, so if something unusual occurred, it would automatically sit in plausible deniability. Was it the environment? Was it malfunction? Or was it something entirely different? That ambiguity keeps the story alive. Let's go back to the Skywall version, but this time slower. The claim doesn't describe random lights in the sky, it describes manoeuvres, objects emerging from cloud cover and matching aircraft vectors in real time. Not trailing, not fleeing, responding. That distinction is important because Antarctica already produces visual illusions. Light refracts strangely over ice. Temperature layers bend horizon. Cloud inversion can create phantom shapes, but coordinated vector response, that suggests intent. In the accounts that circulate, pilots report instruments fluctuating simultaneously. Compass drift is normal near the poles, but synchronized fluctuation across multiple aircraft, that's harder to explain casually. Altitude jitter, gyroscopic instability, static bursts across multiple channels. Now that could be atmospheric, possibly. Polar ionospheric activity can disrupt communication. Solar interference can distort signal readings. But what gives the story its staying power is what happens next. The discharge, not the hull, not direct fire, into the ice. A straight fracture line across frozen sea, close enough to destabilize, far enough to avoid destruction. That's not how you eliminate a threat, that's how you reposition one. It's the difference between someone firing at you and someone firing just close enough to make you move. One is annihilation, the other is control. And the word that survives every retelling is the same. Herding, not attacking, herding, which implies intelligence, strategy, dominance of space. The fleet reportedly withdraws, not obliterated, not sank, withdraws. The uncomfortable bit, if nothing extraordinary happened, why does the language of retreat echo so consistently across independent retellings? That's the psychological hook. Not lasers, not aliens, retreat. And when the most powerful navy on Earth changes course, people notice. Admiral Richard Evelyn Byrd was not a fringe character. He was decorated naval officer, an aviator, a polar explorer with global recognition. Before Highjump, he'd already flown over the North Pole and the South Pole. He understood polar navigation better than almost anyone alive at the time. He knew extreme environments, distortion perception. He knew how men behaved under isolation and stress. He wasn't naive, and he wasn't easily impressed. That's important because the Skywar narrative doesn't work without credibility at the top. After Operation Highjump concluded, Byrd gave interviews discussing the strategic importance of polar regions.
Our very distinguished guest for this evening is Admiral Richard E. Byrd.
In one wildly referenced statement, he warned that the United States should be prepared for the possibility of aircraft flying from pole to pole at incredible speeds. Now, context matters. This was early Cold War rhetoric. Long-range Soviet bombers were real concern. Technology was advancing rapidly. Byrd could have been speaking purely in strategic military terms, but language is rarely neutral, and his tone had shifted. Before Highjump, Byrd spoke like an explorer, pushing into the unknown.
So I'm willing to say to you that there will be a number of expeditions that will follow, I think, year after year, to bottom of the world, because the government has really become interested.
After Highjump, he spoke like a man who understood that the unknown might push back. He didn't describe a battle. He didn't come from an exotic craft. He didn't claim alien contact, but he didn't dismiss polar threats either. And that gap, that space between confirmation and denial, is where decades of speculation began. Because when a credible man chooses careful words, people listen to what he doesn't say. Right, let's slow it down and treat it properly, because there are 3 explanations for what the Sky War version describes, and each one carries different consequences. Non-human advanced crafts. If the objects were non-human, then Antarctica isn't just remote, it's occupied. That implies either a long-term presence, hidden infrastructure, or a domain boundary, an area considered off limits. And if the herding detail is accurate, striking ice instead of hull, that suggests deterrence, not annihilation. That's strategic behaviour, which is far more unsettling than random aggression. Now, is there verified evidence of extraterrestrial craft in Antarctica? No, not that stands up to scrutiny anyway, but absence of evidence isn't satisfying when the narrative is structured around retreat. That's why the theory survives. It explains the retreat in a single dramatic stroke. Number 2, breakaway human technology. This one is less cosmic and arguably more plausible. Post-war research programs were real, captured scientists were real. Operation Paperclip did a video on that. Rapid technological advancement in the late 1940s was very real. If experimental propulsion systems or unconventional aircraft were being tested somewhere remote, Antarctica would be ideal. No civilian witnesses, minimal oversight, extreme conditions that mask anomalies. If you wanted to demonstrate superiority without open war, a controlled show of force in an isolated region would do it. No headlines, no public panic, just a quiet message. Now, that doesn't mean that happened, but strategically it makes more sense than space invaders parking up under the ice. There are, of course, more extreme versions. Some claim remnants of a late Second World War research program established hidden facilities in Antarctica before the war ended. There's no verified evidence of operational underground fortresses beneath the ice, but post-war secrecy captured scientists, and missing documentation created a narrative vacuum, and vacuums get filled. Others argue rare polar atmospheric plasma events could explain unusual lights or instrument behaviour, extreme cold, charged air, electrical anomalies. That explanation is far less cinematic but far more comfortable. And then there's the one people whisper about, the idea that Antarctica isn't just surface territory, that it's a boundary, an entrance, an access point. I'm not going into that here, that's for later, because this is the Byrd trilogy and we've got 2 more chapters. For now, we stay on the ice. Number 3 is myth inflation. Nothing extraordinary happened. Highjump encountered brutal weather, equipment struggled. The mission timeline shifted, Byrd spoke cautiously in interviews, and over decades fragments became patterns. Humans are exceptional at this. If the most powerful navy on Earth goes south and comes back early, we don't shrug. We assume they saw something, because mystery hates empty space. We fill it every time. Here's the uncomfortable bit. All 3 explanations require Antarctica to matter: base, testing ground, or mythic canvas. Either way, it stops being just ice, and once a place becomes symbolically important, stories freeze like the frost. Strip away the flashes, strip away the angular craft, strip away the word herding. What are we left with? A massive military expedition to the least inhabited continent on Earth, an early withdrawal, and a senior commander speaking carefully about the future threats from polar regions. Now, here's where it gets interesting. After Highjump, Antarctica slowly stops being a frontier. It becomes regulated. In 1959, 12 nations signed the Antarctic Treaty. No military bases, no weapons testing, no territorial expansion, scientific cooperation only. On the surface, that makes perfect sense. The Cold War was escalating, nobody wanted another flashpoint. But step back, Antarctica is the only continent on Earth without a permanent population. No cities, no sovereignty in the traditional sense, no voting base, no headlines, and yet it is tightly governed. You can visit, but not freely. You can research, but under agreement. You can explore, but with limits. If Earth were a network, Antarctica would be the restricted admin panel, accessible but monitored. Now, I'm not saying the treaty proves a hidden civilization beneath the ice. That would be lazy thinking. What I'm saying is this. When a region moves from wild frontier to internationally controlled zone in less than 2 decades, people start connecting dots, rightly or wrongly, because patterns matter in geopolitics, and Highjump becomes the first modern event tied to that pattern, not because it confirmed anything, but because it left space for interpretation, and humans do not tolerate empty space. We will fill it with caution, with strategy, or with myth. Hang on a minute, mate, what's that bloody sauce you're in there?
This one, Shane.
Yeah, when have you had that since?
It's been in 2 videos now, mate.
That's it. I genuinely never noticed when I was editing, when you were floating there. Why have you got a new ship?
Oh, I had an accident, mate.
Define accident.
Structural miscalculation. Minor reality shear. Don't be mad, mate. I had to use your credit card again.
Oh, again? You...
Relax, mate. I got it from the Dulce dealership, and I ticked the extended warranty this time.
The dealership under Dulce?
Yeah, of course there is, mate. It's the easiest place to get them from.
Unbelievable, mate. We'll discuss this later, not on camera. Right, back to Antarctica. Here's what matters. Highjump doesn't end with a victory parade. It ends quietly, not dramatic. Press conference, no detailed debrief to the public, no cinematic explanation, just a fleet that went south and came back earlier than expected, and an admiral who spoke carefully about future threats from the polar regions. Now, that could mean advanced aircraft, it could mean Cold War escalation, it could mean nothing more than strategic foresight, but the pattern describes massive expedition, ambiguous outcome, global treaty, controlled access. If nothing happened, why does the language surrounding it feel restrained? Why does Antarctica shift from frontier to managed boundary? Because here's the uncomfortable possibility. Maybe Highjump wasn't a battle. Maybe it was contact. Not hostile, not friendly, just a message, a demonstration, a line drawn in ice. And if that line was drawn, then the next chapter isn't about weapons, it's about warning. And that's where the story gets stranger. Because next week, part 2 of the trilogy, the claim isn't about aircraft in the sky, it's about escort, conversation, and something beneath the surface. But that's part 2. For now, we stay on the ice. Stay curious, my friends. Shane out.